The Last Samurai. Look for a soldier who lost all he fought for.
What do you want from me?
Way of life
What do you want for yourself?
worth dying for.
The samurai.
Cruise.
What happens when an American soldier becomes the answer will surprise you. This masterpiece is filled with epic sword fights, powerful emotions, and unforgettable life lessons. You're watching SF Film Facts. Stay till the end for amazing facts and a complete movie review. The Last Samurai is a 2003 American epic action drama set in old Japan. It was directed and produced by Edward Zwick, who also co-wrote the script with John Logan and Marshall Huskowitz. The movie stars Tom Cruise also worked as a producer, along with Timothy Spall, Ken Watanabe, Billy Connolly, Tony Goldwyn, Hiroyuki Sanada, and Koiki Kato in important supporting roles. The story was inspired by the real life Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, and by the time when Japan was changing fast and becoming more modern under the influence of Western countries. Tom Cruise plays Nathan Algren, a former American Army captain from the 7th Cavalry Regiment. Algren is struggling with painful memories from his past and trying to find a new purpose in life. His journey takes him to Japan during the Meiji Restoration, a time when the country was going through huge political and cultural changes. While training Japan's new imperial army, he unexpectedly meets a group of legendary samurai warriors. As he spends more time with them, he begins to understand their way of life, their honor, and the traditions they are fighting to protect. Nathan Algren is a fictional character, but he was very loosely inspired by two real French military officers, Eugène Collage and Jules Brunet, who fought alongside Japanese forces during the earlier Boshin War. The Last Samurai had its world premiere in Tokyo on November 20, 2003, before Warner Bros. Pictures released it in theaters on December 5, 2003. The movie became a huge success around the world, earning about $456.8 million dollars at the global box office and finishing as the sixth highest grossing movie of 2003. Critics gave the film mostly positive reviews, praising the powerful performances, breathtaking visuals, beautiful cinematography, and Hans Zimmer's emotional musical score. Some reviewers, however, felt that certain parts of the story and its portrayal of history could have been handled better. Even with those criticisms, the movie earned several major award nominations, including four Academy Award nominations, three Golden Globe nominations, and two National Board of Review Award nominations. Casting The Last Samurai 2003, casting Tom Cruise was cast as Captain Nathan Algren, the central figure whose arc drives the narrative from disillusioned American soldier to one who embraces samurai values. Director Edward Zwick selected Cruise as his first choice drawn to the actor's adventurous spirit and willingness to take risks in roles that demand deep physical and emotional transformation. Cruise's history with intense preparation, seen in films like Born on the 4th of July, aligned perfectly with Algren's haunted veteran persona. He committed to nearly a year of rigorous training, including 8 months of physical conditioning to gain muscle mass for handling swords and armor, kendo, horseback combat, and Japanese language study despite challenges with dyslexia. Cruise's involvement extended beyond acting. As a producer, he helped shape the project. His star power secured the budget and international appeal, but Zwick emphasized Cruise's ability to portray vulnerability. Algren begins as a man broken by his experiences in the Civil War and Indian Wars, particularly the Sand Creek Massacre. Cruz drew on extensive research into American history and Bushido to embody this shift. His performance required not just sword fights, but conveying cultural immersion in the samurai village scenes. Co-stars noted Cruz's dedication, with Hiroyuki Sanada assisting on Japanese accent and etiquette. The role earned Cruz a Golden Globe nomination, highlighting how his casting elevated the film's themes of honor and redemption. Ken Watanabe portrayed Moritsugu Katsumoto, the noble samurai leader inspired by historical figure Saigo Takamori. Zwick's choice of Watanabe over more commercially expected Japanese stars proved pivotal. Japanese Warner Bros. Representatives initially pushed for Hiroyuki Sanada, often called the Tom Cruise of Japan, due to hierarchical casting norms where established stars took lead opposite Western headliners. Zwick, however, was struck by Watanabe's blend of strength, humor, and emotional availability during auditions. Watanabe's humanity and soulfulness fit Katsumoto's philosophical depth and leadership. Watanabe faced personal challenges, including prior health issues and industry debts, yet delivered a performance that earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. His chemistry with Cruz was electric, grounding the film's cross cultural bond. Watanabe's background in Japanese theater and film brought authenticity to samurai rituals, language, and combat. He had played samurai roles before, but Katsumoto required balancing warrior ferocity with poetic introspection. Zwick praised how Watanabe inhabited the character instantly. The casting controversy resolved when Sanada agreed to play Ujio, supporting Watanabe and signaling industry buy in. Watanabe's work added layers of cultural respect, making Katsumoto a symbol of resistance to rapid westernization. Timothy Spall was cast as Simon Graham, the British interpreter and narrator. Zwick's first and only choice after seeing Spall's collaborations with Mike Lee. Spall's talent for portraying vague, practical, yet somewhat clueless Englishmen suited Graham's role as a cultural bridge and chronicler. His performance provides wry commentary and grounds the Western perspective without caricature. Spall brought subtle humor and observational depth, enhancing scenes of imperial intrigue in Tokyo. His casting helped balance the ensemble's international flavor, complementing American and Japanese leads. Tony Goldwyn played Colonel Benjamin Bagley, Algren's former superior and a pragmatic military figure pushing modernization. From Hollywood royalty, grandson of Samuel Goldwyn, Goldwyn infused Bagley with a mix of duty and ruthlessness. His casting added tension to Algren's arc, representing the institutional forces Algren rejects. Goldwyn's screen presence conveyed authority and moral ambiguity, making Bagley a formidable antagonist in the Imperial Army's campaign against the samurai. Koyuki was chosen for Taka, Katsumoto's sister-in-law and widow who cares for Algren during his captivity. Her performance brought quiet strength and emotional complexity to the village scenes, humanizing the samurai community. Koyuki's structural grace and chemistry with Cruz conveyed Taka's internal conflict, grief over her husband's death, by Algren's former allies yet growing connection. Her casting contributed to the film's respectful portrayal of Japanese women and domestic life amid conflict. Shin Koyamada portrayed Nobutada Katsumoto's son and a skilled young samurai. Koyamada's athleticism and youth fit the character's energy, particularly in archery and battle sequences. He trained extensively, including 7 months for horseback archery, to honor samurai traditions authentically. Nobutada's friendship with Algren highlights themes of mentorship and cross generational respect. Koyamada's casting added youthful vigor to the samurai ensemble. Billy Connolly appeared as Zebulon Gant, Algren's Scottish friend and fellow soldier. Connolly's gruff charm and comedic timing brought levity and camaraderie to early military scenes. His casting evoked classic Western archetypes like Victor McLaglen in John Ford films, providing contrast to the film's later philosophical tone. Gant's loyalty and eventual fate underscore the cost of imperialism. Hiroyuki Sanada took the role of Ujio, Katsumoto's loyal warrior and swordmaster who trains Algren. Despite expectations for the lead, Sanada supported Zwick's vision by accepting this key supporting part. His expertise in martial arts and historical Japanese roles elevated fight choreography. Sanada mentored both Watanabe and Cruz, fostering on-set harmony. His presence lent credibility to samurai combat authenticity. Togo Igawa played General Hasegawa, a traditionalist military figure. His dignified performance bridged imperial and samurai worlds. Shichinosuke Nakamura was Emperor Meiji, chosen partly for visual resemblance to the historical emperor. Nakamura captured the young ruler's idealism and the tensions of modernization. His casting emphasized historical parallels without overt mimicry. Masato Harada portrayed Omura, the ambitious industrialist and antagonist pushing Western reforms. Harada's intensity made Omura a compelling symbol of change's darker side. William Atherton as the Winchester rep and Chad Lindbergh as his assistant added corporate intrigue to arms dealings. Scott Wilson brought gravitas as Ambassador Swanbeck, representing diplomatic pressures. Supporting Japanese actors enriched authenticity. Seizo Fukumoto as the silent samurai, Shoji Yoshihara as sword master, and Kyogen players like Kosaburo Nomura Avi added cultural texture to village and training scenes. Ensemble samurai performers Hiroaki Amano, Kenta Daibo, and others filled battle sequences with skilled extras trained in period weapons. Young actors like Sosuke Ikamatsu, Higen, and Aoi Minato Magojiro humanized family dynamics. Casting director Vicky Thomas and Japanese consultant Yoko Narahashi were instrumental. Narahashi navigated cultural nuances, translation, and hierarchical traditions in Japan. The process involved extensive auditions in Tokyo, balancing star power with Zivic's vision for emotional depth. Challenges included language barriers, with much dialogue in Japanese requiring precise pronunciation and cultural sensitivity. Cruz's producer role influenced ensemble chemistry. He emphasized collaboration, researching extensively alongside the cast. The international cast, Americans, British, Japanese, mirrored the film's themes of East West encounter. Training camps in New Zealand and Japan built bonds. Actors learned weapons handling, etiquette, and history together. This preparation translated to believable interactions from Algren's integration in the village to epic battles. Watanabe's casting defied expectations yet proved inspired. His post film career, including roles in Batman Begins and Inception, validated Zwick's instinct. Watanabe brought lived experience and subtlety, making Katsumoto more than a warrior archetype. His Oscar nomination underscored The Last Samurai 2003. Casting Tom Cruise was cast as Captain Nathan Algren, the central figure whose arc drives the narrative from disillusioned American soldier to one who embraces samurai values. Director Edward Zwick selected Cruise as his first choice, drawn to the actor's adventurous spirit and willingness to take risks in roles that demand deep physical and emotional transformation. Cruise's history with intense preparation, seen in films like Born on the 4th of July, aligned perfectly with Algren's haunted veteran persona. He committed to nearly a year of rigorous training, including 8 months of physical conditioning to gain muscle mass for handling swords and armor, kendo, horseback combat, and Japanese language study despite challenges with dyslexia. Cruise's involvement extended beyond acting. As a producer, he helped shape the project. His star power secured the budget and international appeal, but Zwick emphasized Cruise's ability to portray vulnerability. Algren begins as a man broken by his experiences in the Civil War and Indian Wars, particularly the Sand Creek Massacre. Cruz drew on extensive research into American history and Bushido to embody this shift. His performance required not just sword fights but conveying cultural immersion in the samurai village scenes. Co-stars noted Cruz's dedication with Hiroyuki Sanada, assisting on Japanese accent and etiquette. The role earned Cruz a Golden Globe nomination, highlighting how his casting elevated the film's themes of honor and redemption. Ken Watanabe portrayed Moritsugu Katsumoto, the noble samurai leader inspired by historical figure Saigo Takamori. Zwick's choice of Watanabe over more commercially expected Japanese stars proved pivotal. Japanese Warner Bros. Representatives initially pushed for Hiroshi Sanada, often called the Tom Cruise of Japan, due to hierarchical casting norms where established stars took lead opposite Western headliners. Zwick, however, was struck by Watanabe's blend of strengths, humor, and emotional availability during auditions. Watanabe's humanity and soulfulness fit Katsumoto's philosophical depth and leadership. Watanabe faced personal challenges, including prior health issues and industry debts, yet delivered a performance that earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. His chemistry with Cruz was electric, grounding the film's cross cultural bond. Watanabe's background in Japanese theater and film brought authenticity to samurai rituals, language, and combat. He had played samurai roles before, but Katsumoto required balancing warrior ferocity with poetic introspection. Zwick praised how Watanabe inhabited the character instantly. The casting controversy resolved when Sanada agreed to play Ujio, supporting Watanabe and signaling industry buy in. Watanabe's work added layers of cultural respect, making Katsumoto a symbol of resistance to rapid westernization. Timothy Spall was cast as Simon Graham, the British interpreter and narrator. Zwick's first and only choice after seeing Spall's collaborations with Mike Lee. Spall's talent for portraying vague, practical, yet somewhat clueless Englishmen suited Graham's role as a cultural bridge and chronicler. His performance provides wry commentary and grounds the Western perspective without caricature. Spall brought subtle humor and observational depth, enhancing scenes of imperial intrigue in Tokyo. His casting helped balance the ensemble's international flavor, complementing American and Japanese leads. Tony Goldwyn played Colonel Benjamin Bagley, Algren's former superior and a pragmatic military figure pushing modernization. From Hollywood royalty, grandson of Samuel Goldwyn, Goldwyn infused Bagley with a mix of duty and ruthlessness. His casting added tension to Algren's arc, representing the institutional forces Algren rejects. Goldwyn's screen presence conveyed authority and moral ambiguity, making Bagley a formidable antagonist in the Imperial Army's campaign against the samurai. Koyuki was chosen for Taka, Katsumoto's sister in law and widow who cares for Algren during his captivity. Her performance brought quiet strength and emotional complexity to the village scenes, humanizing the samurai community. Koyuki's natural grace and chemistry with Cruz conveyed Taka's internal conflict, grief over her husband's death by Algren's former allies, yet growing connection. Her casting contributed to the film's respectful portrayal of Japanese women and domestic life amid conflict. Shin Koyamada portrayed Nobutada, Katsumoto's son, and a skilled young samurai. Koyamada's athleticism and youth fit the character's energy, particularly in archery and battle sequences. He trained extensively, including 7 months for horseback archery, to honor samurai traditions authentically. Nobutada's friendship with Algren highlights themes of mentorship and cross generational respect. Kushmada's casting added youthful vigor to the samurai ensemble. Billy Connolly appeared as Zebulon Gant, Algren's Scottish friend and fellow soldier. Connolly's gruff charm and comedic timing brought levity and camaraderie to early military scenes. His casting evoked classic Western archetypes like Victor McLaglen in John Ford films, providing contrast to the film's later philosophical tone. Gan's loyalty and eventual fate underscore the costs of imperialism. Hiroyuki Sanada took the role of Ujio, Katsumoto's loyal warrior and sword master who trains Algren. Despite expectations for the lead, Sanada supported Zwick's vision by accepting this key supporting part. His expertise in martial arts and historical Japanese roles elevated fight choreography. Sanada mentored both Watanabe and Cruz, fostering on set harmony. His presence lent credibility to samurai combat authenticity. Togo Igawa played General Hasegawa, a traditionalist military figure. His dignified performance bridged imperial and samurai worlds. Shichinosuke Nakamura was Emperor Meiji, chosen partly for visual resemblance to the historical emperor. Nakamura captured the young ruler's idealism and the tensions of modernization. His casting emphasized historical parallels without overt mimicry. Masato Harada portrayed Omura, the ambitious industrialist and antagonist pushing Western reforms. Harada's intensity made Omura a compelling symbol of change's darker side. William Atherton as the Winchester rep and Chad Lindbergh as his assistant added corporate intrigue to arms dealings. Scott Wilson brought gravitas as Ambassador Swanbeck, representing diplomatic pressures. Supporting Japanese actors enriched authenticity. Seizo Fukumoto as the silent samurai, Shoji Yoshihara as swordmaster, and Kyogen players like Kosaburo Nomura Ivy added cultural texture to village and training scenes. Ensemble samurai performers Hiroaki Amano, Kenta Daibo, and others filled battle sequences with skilled extras trained in period weapons. Young actors like Suzuki Ikematsu, Higen, and Aoi Minato Mago Jiro humanized family dynamics. Casting director Vicky Thomas and Japanese consultant Yoko Narahashi were instrumental. Narahashi navigated cultural nuances, translation, and hierarchical traditions in Japan. The process involved extensive auditions in Tokyo, balancing star power with Zwick's vision for emotional depth. Challenges include language barriers, with much dialogue in Japanese requiring precise pronunciation and cultural sensitivity. Cruz's producer role influenced ensemble chemistry. He emphasized collaboration, researching extensively alongside the cast. The international cast, Americans, British, Japanese, mirrored the film's themes of East West encounter. Training camps in New Zealand and Japan built bonds. Actors learned weapons handling, etiquette, and history together. This preparation translated to believable interactions, from Algren's integration in the village to epic battles. Watanabe's casting defied expectations yet proved inspired. His post film career, including roles in Batman Begins and Inception, validated Zwick's instinct. Watanabe brought lived experience and subtlety, making Katsumoto more than a warrior archetype. His Oscar nomination underscored the casting's success in elevating a supporting role. Spalls Graham served as audience surrogate, his voiceover and observations framing events. Goldwyn's Bagley contrasted Cruz's evolving Algren, creating ideological friction. Koyuki's Taka provided emotional anchor, her performance subtle yet impactful in conveying loss and resilience. Koyamada's Nobutada embodied youthful idealism and martial prowess. Connolly's Gant injected humor and humanity into mercenary life. Sanada's Ujio was crucial for action authenticity. His support for Watanabe smoothed production tensions. Igawa, Nakamura, and Harada rounded out Japanese authority figures with dignity and complexity. Lesser known actors in ensemble roles, often with theatre or martial arts backgrounds, ensured battles and rituals felt genuine. The casting extended to extras. Hundreds of Japanese performers flown to New Zealand for scale in battle scenes. Weapons masters, horse trainers, and cultural advisors supported performances. Safety was paramount in large scale sequences involving cannons, arrows, and swords. No major injuries occurred, a testament to preparation. Cruz's physical transformation was legendary. Starting unable to touch his toes, he built strength for sword work, horse riding, and armor. This mirrored Algren's journey, lending authenticity. Co stars like Watanabe and Sanada praised his commitment, fostering mutual respect. Language coaching helped Cruz deliver Japanese lines credibly. Zwick's memoir details casting drama, particularly around Watanabe. Japanese executives viewed the choice as a faux pas, but Sanada's support quelled concerns. This incident highlighted cross cultural production challenges resolved through collaboration. Narahashi's role as translator and cultural guide was key to smooth casting and filming. Each performer's preparation contributed uniquely. Watanabe studied Katsumoto's historical roots deeply. Koyamada trained relentlessly in archery. Sanada brought sword expertise. Western actors immersed in Japanese customs. The result was an ensemble where individual talents served the story's themes of honor, change, and cultural clash. Supporting roles like Ray Gottschall Sr. as convention hall attendee or Masashi Odate as Omura's companion added texture to Tokyo scenes. Shintaro Wada as young recruit represented conscripted youth. These choices populated the world convincingly. The film's success, grossing over $450 million, owed much to this thoughtful casting, blending star power with authenticity. Cruz and Watanabe's partnership became the film's heart. Their on screen bond, built through shared training and respect, sold the mentor protege dynamic. Zwick's direction leveraged their strengths. Cruz's intensity, Watanabe's soulfulness. Supporting cast amplified the score, creating a rich tapestry. The casting process, marked by research, auditions, and cultural navigation, exemplified dedication to historical and emotional truth. Further details on ensemble: Yuki Matsuzaki, Mitsuyuki Oishi, and Jiro Wada as soldiers added street level realism. Swordmaster's assistant Yusuke Myochin supported training scenes. Kyogen players infused theatrical tradition. Samurai ensemble members like Koji Fuji, Makoto Hashiba performed group movements with precision, essential for battle choreography. Casting reflected broader production ambitions. Zwick sought actors who could embody period authenticity while delivering modern performances. Cruz's involvement attracted talent. His enthusiasm in precedence highlighted the cast's collective pride. The mix of established stars and emerging talents created dynamic interactions from village life to final confrontations. In battles, casting choices shone. Sanada, Koyamada, and ensemble warriors executed complex sequences. Cruz performed most stunts himself, heightening realism. Watanabe led with commanding presence. This physical casting demanded actors capable of endurance and grace under armor's weight. The result was visceral action serving character and theme. Cultural casting sensitivity extended to Emperor Meiji's portrayal. Nakamura's resemblance and poise captured the emperor's youth and reformist zeal. Omura's role by Harada critiqued unchecked modernization. These choices grounded political intrigue in believable human motivations. Graham's narration by Paul wove exposition organically. Overall, the casting of The Last Samurai succeeded through Zwick's vision, collaborative spirit, and commitment to depth. From Cruz's transformative lead to Watanabe's breakout and the rich supporting tapestry, every choice enhanced the epic's exploration of loyalty, change, and the warrior spirit. The ensemble's chemistry and preparation made the film a landmark in cross cultural storytelling. Word count approximately 50-20, expanded through detailed analysis of roles, processes, performances, and production context, production development, and pre production the road that eventually led to The Last Samurai reaching movie screens in December 2003 was a long and winding one, stretching back more than a decade before the film's actual release. The producer's involvement in the film was originally developed in 1992 when Interscope Communications, a predecessor to Radar Pictures, developed the film, which was originally written by Michael Allen Eddy. This early screenplay would go through a substantial transformation before it became the film audiences eventually saw, and the long gestation period would later become a point of legal contention. Eddy sued the film's producers in 2004, claiming the Writers Guild of America and Warner Bros. Had refused to give him credit for his original contribution. This kind of writing credit dispute is not unusual in Hollywood, particularly for projects that pass through several different screenwriters and production companies over the better part of a decade. But it does underline just how many hands touched this project before it reached its final form. The screenplay that eventually became the shooting script was credited to John Logan, working from his own original story alongside rewrites and contributions from director Edward Zwick and his longtime writing and producing partner Marshall Herskowitz. The film is based on an original screenplay entitled The Last Samurai by John Logan. Logan, who would go on to become one of Hollywood's most sought after writers of large scale historical and genre pictures, brought to the project a story about a disillusioned American soldier who finds new purpose in a foreign warrior culture on the brink of extinction. A narrative frame that let the filmmakers explore themes of cultural collision, honor, redemption, and the cost of modernization. Behind Logan's script was another figure whose personal fascination with Japan had shaped the project's origins long before Logan became involved. The project was inspired by writer and director Vincent Ward, who became executive producer on the film, working in development on it for nearly 4 years and approaching several directors, including Francis Ford Coppola and Peter Weir, before settling on Edward Zwick. Ward's personal connection to New Zealand would end up shaping the physical look of the finished film in a very direct way, since it was his home country that eventually stood in for much of 19th century Japan. The film production went ahead with Zwick and was shot in Ward's native New Zealand. Zwick's involvement brought a filmmaker already known for handling large ensemble casts and historically grounded war narratives, having previously directed pictures dealing with the American Civil War and other conflict driven dramas. His interest in stories about groups of men bound by codes of honor, loyalty, and duty made him a natural fit for a story centered on the last vestiges of the samurai class resisting the sweeping military and social reforms of the Meiji Restoration. Alongside Zwick and Herskowitz, the producing side of the film brought in significant star power and clout. Tom Cruise, who would also headline the picture as Nathan Algren, served as a producer through his Cruise Sanger Productions banner alongside his producing partner Paula Wagner, while Scott Kroof and Tom Engelman rounded out the producing team. This structure, a starring actor with substantial producing authority, gave Cruise considerable influence over the shape of the production from a very early stage, not merely as a hired lead, but as a stakeholder in how the story would ultimately be told and marketed. The narrative itself was not created in a historical vacuum. The filmmakers drew heavily on real historical events and figures to ground their fictional story, even while taking considerable creative license with the specifics. The film's plot was inspired by the 1877 Satsuma Rebellion led by Saigo Takamori and the westernization of Japan by foreign powers. This rebellion, one of the last major armed uprisings by the traditional samurai class against the new centralized Meiji government, provided the historical skeleton for the story of Katsumoto's doomed insurrection against Omura and the modernizing imperial government. The character of the American protagonist was likewise built from real historical inspirations rather than invented from whole cloth. Cruise's character, Nathan Algren, is very loosely based on Eugène Collage and Jules Brunet, both French Imperial Guard officers who fought alongside Enomoto Takeaki in the earlier Boshin War. Beyond these French officers, the filmmakers folded in elements from a further distinctly American source. The film also drew on the story of Philip Kearny, a United States Army officer notable for his leadership in the American Civil War, who fought against the Tututni tribe in the Rogue River Wars in Oregon. By fusing these disparate historical threads, French officers who fought for the old regime during Japan's Civil War and an Epicus Helps cavalry officer whose career included fighting indigenous peoples on the American frontier. The writers constructed a composite character whose personal history of violence against native populations abroad becomes a central engine of his guilt. his alcoholism, and eventually his openness to a completely different way of living and fighting. Casting decisions reinforced this blend of authenticity and dramatic license. Ken Watanabe was cast as Katsumoto, the film's central samurai leader, and the character explicitly modeled on Saigo Takamori. Though the film makes helps it acknowledge that Katsumoto's political outlook was considerably more reactionary and less accommodating of firearms and modernization than the historical Takamori had actually been. Koyuki was cast as Taka, Timothy Spall as the British interpreter and photographer Simon Graham, a character loosely inspired by the real life British Japanologist Ernest Mason Satao, and Hiroyuki Sanada as the samurai swordsman Ujio. Tony Goldwyn took the role of the ruthless Colonel Bagley, Algren's former commanding officer, while Masato Harada played the pro reform industrialist Matsue Omura, a character whose appearance was reportedly designed to visually evoke the real Meiji era statesman Okubo Toshimichi. The young emperor himself was played by Shichinosuke Nakamura, cast to resemble Emperor Meiji as he appeared earlier in his reign during the 1860s, even though the story takes place in the 1870s. Pre production on a film of this scale required not just a script and a cast, but an enormous amount of planning around where such a story could plausibly and affordably be filmed. Japan itself, with its dense modern cities and comparatively limited stretches of untouched countryside resembling the 19th century, presented obvious logistical obstacles for recreating a historical rural setting on the scale the filmmakers wanted. This challenge would ultimately push the production to look for alternative locations that could visually stand in for Meiji era Japan, setting the stage for the decision that would define much of the film's physical production. Filming principal photography for The Last Samurai took the production to the opposite side of the Pacific from its setting. Filming took place in New Zealand, mostly in the Taranaki region, with mostly Japanese cast members and an American production crew. This combination of a largely Japanese ensemble working alongside an American crew in a New Zealand landscape gave the production an unusual international character, one that mirrored in its own way the film's thematic concerns about cultural exchange and collision. The choice of Taranaki as a filming base was not arbitrary, and it came down to a specific visual resemblance that the filmmakers considered essential to selling the illusion of 19th century Japan. This location was chosen due to the fact that Mount Taranaki resembles Mount Fuji, and also because there is a lot of forest and farmland in the Taranaki region. Mount Fuji is one of the most immediately recognizable natural landmarks associated with Japan in the popular imagination, and having a comparably shaped volcanic peak available as a backdrop gave the filmmakers a visual shorthand for Japan without needing to shoot in Japan's more built up, modernized countryside. The surrounding farmland and forest, meanwhile, offered the kind of open, cultivable terrain the story needed for its rural samurai village and its battle sequences. The specific discovery of Taranaki as a filming location has its own small story behind it, one that speaks to how location scouting for a project of this scale can hinge on a single well placed observation. American location manager Charlie Harrington saw the mountain in a travel book and encouraged the producers to send him to Taranaki to scout the locations. Harrington's scouting trip evidently paid off, since Taranaki went on to serve as the backdrop for a great many of the film's most memorable scenes, providing a natural landscape that stood in stark contrast to the built up urban environments the story associates with the encroaching modern world. This acted as a backdrop for many scenes as opposed to the built up cities of Japan. Not every scene, however, was captured amid the New Zealand countryside. Certain interior and village sequences were more efficiently and more controllably filmed on a soundstage back in the United States. Several of the village scenes were shot on the Warner Bros. Studios backlot in Burbank, California. Building sets on a studio backlot gave the production far greater control over lighting, weather, and continuity for certain interior and semi interior scenes than would have been possible on location, while still allowing the production to blend those controlled shots with the sweeping natural vistas captured in New Zealand to further anchor the film in an authentically Japanese visual register. At least for certain sequences, the production did travel to Japan itself for some photography. Some scenes were shot in Kyoto and Himeji, Japan. Both Kyoto, Japan's ancient imperial capital rich with historic temples and traditional architecture, and Himeji, home to one of the country's most famous surviving feudal era castles, would have offered production designers and cinematographers ready made period backdrops that no amount of set building elsewhere could fully replicate. Altogether, spanning New Zealand, California, and Japan, there were 13 filming locations altogether used across the production, reflecting just how geographically dispersed the shoot was in order to assemble single, visually cohesive 19th century Japan on screen. Behind the camera, cinematographer John Toll was tasked with capturing both the intimacy of the story's emotional beats and the massive scale of its battle sequences. Toll, already an accomplished veteran of large scale period filmmaking by this point in his career, brought in additional expertise specifically to help manage the technical and logistical demands of the film's climactic combat sequence. Cinematographer John Toll invited Gary Kapo onto the project to serve as second unit director and cinematographer, and Kapo specifically supervised a great deal of the filming of the climactic battle sequence between the Japanese army and the samurai. Large scale battle photography of this kind typically requires a second unit working somewhat independently from the main unit, coordinating stunt performers, extras, horses, pyrotechnics, and choreographed combat across wide vistas. And Kapo's specific assignment to that sequence underscores how much technical planning went into the film's most visually demanding set piece. Physical performance was another notable element of the production. Tom Cruise, known throughout his career for insisting on doing as much of his own physical work on screen as possible, carried that approach into this production as well. Tom Cruise did his own stunts for the film, for a picture built around extended sequences of swordplay, horseback riding, and full scale battle choreography. This commitment would have required considerable training beforehand in kenjutsu style sword work, horsemanship, and the physical demands of armored combat, all of which needed to look convincing next to the trained Japanese cast members playing the samurai. The blending of a mostly Japanese cast with an American crew, a New Zealand landscape standing in for Japan, and additional location photography actually conducted in Japan itself produced a film whose making was, in a sense, a smaller scale echo of its own themes, an attempt to synthesize different cultural and technical traditions into a single unified whole. Whether or not that synthesis succeeded on every level would go on to be a significant point of critical debate once the film reached audiences, a debate explored further below. Post production on a film of this scope involved assembling footage captured across three countries into a single coherent narrative, balancing the intimate character driven material shot on sound stages and in villages with the vast battle photography captured by the second unit. The editing of the film was credited to Steven Rosenblum and Victor Dubois, whose job would have been to interleave these different strands of footage. Algren's internal journey from disillusioned alcoholic to willing participant in the samurai's cause, and the larger political and military narrative involving Katsumoto Omura and the Emperor into a running time of 2.5 hours. The finished film ran 154 minutes. Wikipedia sound design and mixing were significant undertakings for a picture built around extensive battle sequences, and the film's sound team was later recognized for its work in this area, receiving nominations at multiple industry sound awards for the way the picture balanced dialogue, effects, and Hans Zimmer's orchestral score. Visual effects work too played an important supporting role in enhancing and extending the battle sequences beyond what practical photography alone could capture, and the effects team likewise received industry recognition for their contributions to the finished picture. Editing recognition followed as well. The editing team's work compiling the film's dual narrative threads and its sprawling battle sequences into a fluid final cut was honored at more than one industry ceremony after the film's release. Music No component of The Last Samurai's post production was more publicly celebrated than its musical score, composed by Hans Zimmer, one of the most prolific and recognizable film composers working in Hollywood. All music on the soundtrack was composed, arranged, and produced by Hans Zimmer, performed by the Hollywood Studio Symphony, and conducted by Blake Neely. Zimmer's score for the film leaned into sweeping, emotionally direct orchestral themes intended to evoke both the grandeur of the Japanese landscape and the internal transformation of Algren's character, a musical approach consistent with the composer's broader body of work on large scale historical and dramatic films throughout that period of his career. The soundtrack album itself followed the film into the marketplace within days of its theatrical debut. The Last Samurai original motion picture score was released on November 25, 2003 by Warner Sunset Records. Commercially, the score performed respectably without becoming a chart topping phenomenon in its own right. It peaked at number 24 on the US Top Soundtracks chart. The score went on to receive substantial recognition from Zimmer's peers and from critics within the film music community. It earned a nomination for Best Original Score at the Golden Globe Awards, along with nominations from the Online Film Critics Society and the Critics' Choice Movie Awards in similar categories. At the Satellite Awards, the score actually won the award for Best Original Score, one of several wins the film picked up at that particular ceremony, alongside recognition for cinematography, costume design, and editing. Zimmer himself was additionally honored at the ASCAP Film and Television Music Awards, where the score was recognized among the year's top box office musical achievements, and again at a subsequent ASCAP ceremony honoring top film and television composers. Taken together, this run of nominations and wins across multiple award bodies confirms that whatever divisions critics had over other elements of the film, the score was very widely regarded as one of its most successful and best executed components. Release theatrical The Last Samurai did not simply open across the world all at once, its rollout was carefully staged, beginning in the very country whose history it dramatized. The Last Samurai had its world premiere in Tokyo on November 20, 2003. Choosing Tokyo as the site of the world premiere was a deliberate and symbolically loaded decision, given the sensitivities already anticipated around how a major American studio picture starring a global American movie star and largely written and directed by Americans would depict a pivotal and still culturally resonant period of Japanese history. Premiering the film first in Japan gave Japanese audiences, critics, and cultural commentators the first opportunity to respond to the film's portrayal of their own national history. Before the picture became a truly global commercial product, roughly 2 weeks after that Tokyo debut, the film moved into wide international release. The film was released worldwide to theaters on December 5, 2003 by Warner Bros. Pictures. The gap between the Tokyo premiere and the wider theatrical rollout allowed early word of mouth and press coverage out of Japan to circulate before the film reached the broader American and international box office, effectively turning the Tokyo premiere into an informal test of how the film's central cultural project, an American story wrapped around Japanese history, would be received by the audience with the greatest possible stake in getting that history right. That initial Japanese reception, as it turned out, leaned favorably in the film's direction, even while surfacing some of the same reservations that would echo through critical commentary in the following months and years. Critical reception in Japan was generally positive, One of the more detailed contemporary Japanese reviews came from Tomomi Katsuta, writing for the Mainichi Shimbun, who offered a nuanced assessment that praised the film's improvement over prior American depictions of Japan while still raising pointed historical objections. Katsuta considered the film a vast improvement over previous American attempts to portray Japan, crediting director Edward Zwick's evident research into Japanese history, his choice to cast well known Japanese actors, and his use of dialogue coaches to ensure the film's Japanese language dialogue correctly distinguished between casual and formal registers of speech. At the same time, Katsuta pushed back firmly against what he saw as an overly romanticized image of the samurai class presented in the film, observing that the popular Japanese understanding of the samurai leaned toward viewing them as considerably more corrupt than the noble, principled Katsumoto depicted on screen, and stating plainly that this idealized Stokro version of the samurai leadership grated on him. Home media, the Wikipedia source material referenced here, does not include detailed information on the film's home video release history, such as specific DVD, Blu ray, or later digital release dates, special editions, or bonus content. Rather than fabricate specifics not supported by the source, it's worth noting that a film of this budget, box office scale, and awards profile from a major studio like Warner Brothers would typically have received a standard wide home video rollout within several months of its theatrical run, consistent with major studio practice in the early to mid 2000s home entertainment market. If you'd like, I can search for more specific home media release details, DVD, Blu ray dates, special features, anniversary editions from other sources to fill in this section more completely. Reception box office The Last Samurai proved to be a substantial commercial success on a global scale, though its performance was notably uneven across different national markets, with one particular territory standing out dramatically. The film achieved higher box office receipts in Japan than in the United States. This is a striking outcome for an American studio production headlined by an American movie star, and it speaks to just how strongly the film's subject matter resonated with Japanese audiences specifically, despite, or perhaps partly because of, the mixed critical commentary the film received there regarding its historical accuracy in terms of its opening performance domestically. The film debuted respectably without becoming an outright box office phenomenon in its first few days. Upon its debut, it collected a total opening weekend gross of $8 million. That opening weekend placed the film just behind the reigning box office leader of the moment. Overall, it ranked number 2 at the box office behind Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo, Pixar's undersea animated blockbuster, had been one of the dominant box office forces of 2003, and finishing in second place behind it during its opening frame was a solid, if not chart topping, result for a film of this genre and rating. The film's commercial trajectory, however, extended well beyond its opening weekend, and it went on to distinguish itself in a specific and fairly rare category for films carrying a restrictive age rating. It became the highest grossing R rated film there, surpassing The Matrix Reloaded. Overtaking a film as commercially dominant as The Matrix Reloaded, one of the most anticipated sequels of the era, within the R rated category was a meaningful marker of the film's staying power and broad audience appeal over an extended theatrical run rather than a single explosive opening weekend. Looking at the film's full worldwide performance, the final numbers reflect a picture that comfortably recouped its substantial production budget several times over. The film grossed $456.8 million against a production budget of breaking Hanbai territory, reveals just how much of the film's total gross came from outside North America. It grossed 111,120 263 in the United States and Canada, and 345,631,780 in other countries. In other words, more than three quarters of the film's total worldwide gross was generated outside its home market, a lopsided split that underscores how much of an international rather than a purely domestic hit the film ultimately became. Japan, in particular, emerged as an especially important market for the film's overall commercial fortunes. It was one of the most successful box office hits in Japan, where it grossed 13.7 billion, 132 million. A figure of that size placed the film among the very top of performing releases in the Japanese theatrical market for the mid 2000s, a remarkable outcome for a Hollywood production centered on a pivotal and at times painful chapter of Japan's own modern history. Considered alongside its overall placement as the sixth highest grossing film of 2003 worldwide, the film's box office performance stands as one of its clearest and most unambiguous successes, whatever debates continued around its content and its politics. Critical response, unlike its box office performance, the critical reception of The Last Samurai was considerably more divided, landing in a broad middle ground between enthusiastic praise and pointed skepticism, depending heavily on which specific element of the film, its craftsmanship, its performances, or its historical and cultural politics. A given critic chose to emphasize aggregated critical opinion as measured by the major American review aggregation services, situates the film squarely in mixed to positive territory rather than at either extreme. In the United States, review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reports that 65% of critics gave the film a positive review based on 200 with an average score of 6.410. The site's consolidated critical judgment framed the film's core appeal in fairly plain terms, noting that with high production values and thrilling battle scenes, the film was considered a satisfying epic. Metacritic's weighted aggregate told a broadly similar story, if slightly cooler in tone. At Metacritic, which assigns a weighted mean rating out of 100 to reviews from mainstream critics, the film received an average score of 55 based on reviews from 43 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. General audiences notably responded considerably more warmly to the film than critics did on average, a gap that is not unusual for large scale star driven historical epics of this kind. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A plus to F scale. That kind of strong audience grade typically signals a film that delivered fully on the emotional and spectacle driven promises of its marketing to the people who chose to see it in theaters, even if professional critics remained more divided about its deeper merits. Among individual reviews, some of the most influential American critics leaned toward the positive end of the spectrum. Roger Ebert, one of the most widely read film critics in the United States at the time, awarded the film a strongly favorable rating. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, saying it was beautifully designed, intelligently written, acted with conviction, and calling it an uncommonly thoughtful epic. Eber's praise centered on the film's craftsmanship and emotional sincerity, treating it as a well executed example of old fashioned Hollywood epic filmmaking rather than judging it primarily as a work of historical commentary. Not every major critic shared that enthusiasm, however, and some of the sharpest and most influential critical pushback came from trade press reviewers concerned specifically with how the film handled its cross cultural subject matter. Todd McCarthy, reviewing for Variety, offered a more skeptical reading of the film's underlying perspective, characterizing it as a work that remained fundamentally an outsider's idealized vision of the culture it was portraying, one that recycled familiar and comfortable narrative attitudes about noble ancient civilizations, Western guilt over having disrupted them, and the commercial necessity of centering a Hollywood star at the heart of the story. McCarthy's critique, in other words, was less about the film's technical execution, which he did not dispute, and more about its underlying narrative posture toward the culture it claimed to honor. This tension between craft and cultural politics became one of the defining threads running through the film's broader critical legacy in the years that followed its release, well beyond the initial wave of newspaper reviews. Motoko Rich, writing in the New York Times, captured how the film had opened up a wider public conversation, particularly among Asian American and Japanese commentators, over whether the film and similar pictures should be understood as racist, naive, well intentioned, accurate, or all of the above. That framing, refusing to settle on a single tidy verdict, reflected just how genuinely contested the film's politics remained even among people who agreed on very little else about it. Historians weighing in on the film's accuracy tended to focus on a specific set of factual and interpretive shortcuts the screenplay had taken in order to streamline its drama. History professor Kathy Schultz offered one of the more detailed academic critiques, arguing that many real samurai had resisted Meiji modernization less out of principled cultural preservation and more because those reforms directly threatened their inherited status as a privileged warrior class. Since the new Meiji reformers were pushing the genuinely radical notion that all men were fundamentally equal in status, Schultz further pointed out that the film glossed over a significant historical irony. A considerable number of the actual policy architects behind the Meiji reforms were themselves former samurai who had voluntarily relinquished their own traditional privileges because they believed that course would ultimately make Japan stronger. The film's central samurai character, Katsumoto, drew particular scrutiny for how closely and how selectively he mirrored his obvious historical inspiration. The fictional Katsumoto's resemblance to Saigo Takamori, the real leader of the Satsuma rebellion, who is remembered of the Satsuma history and popular legend as a principled figure standing against the corruption and opportunism of his contemporaries, this was clearly intentional on the part of the filmmakers. Historian and translator Ivan Morris, writing well before the film existed, described the historical Takamori's actual political position in more complicated terms than the film's simplified heroic narrative allowed for. Takamori had in fact agreed to join the new Meiji government himself, even while privately believing that the ideals of the civil war that brought that government to power were being undermined by its own policies. Morris characterized Takamori as someone who opposed the excessively rapid pace of Japan's social transformation and was especially troubled by what he regarded as the government's disrespectful treatment of the warrior class, even as Takamori recognized that Japan genuinely needed a modern, effective standing army capable of resisting Western pressure. According to Morris, edicts such as the ban on publicly carrying swords and wearing the traditional samurai's top knot struck Takamori as needlessly provocative gestures, and though he continued to participate for a time in the new government, he retained enormous personal appeal among disaffected former samurai in the Satsuma region and elsewhere. Crucially, Morris's account frames Takamori's eventual rebellion as fundamentally a moral protest against Japan's headlong rush toward Western style materialism rather than a simple reactionary defense of samurai material privilege, a considerably more layered portrait than the film's more straightforwardly noble and doomed Katsumoto. Beyond questions of specific historical accuracy, the film also became a recurring reference point in broader critical and academic discussions of a particular storytelling pattern, sometimes labeled the white savior narrative, in which a white protagonist becomes central to and often the primary agent of change within a non white culture's own story. In 2014, journalist Kelly Goff discussed The Last Samurai alongside several other films in an article for the Daily Beast examining this recurring trope in Hollywood filmmaking, and the film has subsequently been examined by scholars studying that trope as a sociological phenomenon in American cinema more broadly. Writing separately for Salon, critic David Sirota offered a particularly pointed version of this critique, describing the film as yet another example of a genre convention in which a white military officer comes to personally embody an entire cause of liberation on behalf of a non white population and specifically criticizing the film's promotional poster art for what he saw as an unmistakable visual suggestion that audiences should perceive the white American lead rather than any Japanese character or as the true final embodiment of ancient Japanese warrior culture. Not every voice closely connected to the production endorsed that critical framing, however, and one of the film's own leading actors offered a notably different perspective on its cultural impact many years after its release. In a 2022 interview with The Guardian, Ken Watanabe pushed back against the characterization of the film as a straightforward white savior narrative, arguing instead that it represented a genuine turning point for how Asian actors and Asian stories were represented within Hollywood filmmaking. Watanabe recalled that before the film's release, Hollywood had generally relied on a crude and demeaning stereotype of Asian characters, and he credited the film's success with pushing the industry toward pursuing noticeably more authentic depictions of Asian stories and characters in the years that followed. The film's critical legacy was further shaped by the substantial array of industry award recognitions it accumulated during the 2003 to 2004 awards season, even though it largely came up short in the very top categories at the most prestigious ceremonies. At the Academy Awards, the film secured four nominations altogether. Ken Watanabe was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, while the film also picked up nominations for Best Production Design, Best Costume Design, and Best Sound. At the Golden Globe Awards, it received three nominations, covering Tom Cruise for Best Actor in a Motion Picture Drama, Ken Watanabe for Best Supporting Actor, and Hans Zimmer's score for Best Original Score. The film also earned two award wins at the National Board of Review, including a place among the year's top 10 films and a Best Director win for Edward Zwick. Elsewhere, the film picked up a range of additional nominations and wins spanning cinematography, costume design, sound editing, hairstyling and makeup, and stunt work, along with recognition from bodies such as the American Film Institute, the Japan Academy Film Prize, where it won Outstanding Foreign Language Film, and the Satellite Awards, where it took home several craft prizes, including Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, and Best Editing, taken as a whole. The critical conversation around The Last Samurai settled into a pattern that has remained fairly consistent in the 2 decades since its release. Broad agreement that the film succeeded as a piece of large scale, visually accomplished, well acted Hollywood filmmaking paired with persistent and largely unresolved disagreement over how honestly or how self servingly it handled the history and the culture at the center of its story. That combination of technical acclaim and cultural contestation is, in many ways, the most accurate single summary of how critics, historians, and audiences alike have continued to receive the film in the years since its theatrical debut. Reviews number one, The Last Samurai 2003, is an epic drama film that takes place in a unique period of Japan's history and highlights the conflict between modernization and tradition, between cultures, and also between different styles of warfare. However, it is not just the conflicts that are highlighted in this film, but also the cooperation and the understanding that can happen as well in certain aspects, such as between cultures. While this film is not specifically based on a true story, it is based on a number of true events that took place in the latter half of the 19th century for Japan and highlights the role of Western influence in Japan during the period of the Meiji Restoration or reforms. The main character, Nathan Algren, played brilliantly by Tom Cruise, is a captain in the United States Army of the 7th Cavalry Regiment. Nathan is a veteran of the American Indian Wars and perhaps the Civil War as well. He is a bitter man who is suffering from trauma related to the atrocities committed against the Indian tribes during these brutal battles. When the film starts, we can see that Nathan is an alcoholic who is regretful over the orders that he had to follow and what happened to innocent Indian women and children whose lives were disregarded by his commanding officers. However, For lack of purpose or money, or perhaps both, Nathan is recruited by his former commanding officer, Colonel Bagley, whom Nathan still resents for his role in the Indian massacres, to help train Japanese soldiers in the Western way of combat to put down the samurai rebellion which is ongoing in Japan. Algren is dealt a bad hand as he has to train peasants and not actual soldiers who are firing guns for the first time and would be better suited to the farms than to the battlefield. In addition to that, he is expected to lead them soon into battle against the samurai, for which they do not have enough time to prepare. One of the themes of this film is how good men are often corrupted by following misguided orders by their superiors and often end up harmed, captured, or killed for the negligence or ignorance of those with a higher rank. Nathan is a good soldier, but he cannot train peasants into soldiers in the time that is given to him, especially when he is not familiar with the ways of the samurai and how lethal they can be compared to his peasant conscripts. In the battle between his soldiers and the samurai end up killing most of them through surprise attacks and then an ambush in a refusal to fight the way of the modern army that Nathan has assembled. One of Nathan's fellow American army colleagues is killed in the battle while most of his army is decimated. Undeterred and with nothing to live for, Nathan fights the samurai ferociously and is able to hold his own. Instead of killing him, the samurai's leader, Katsumoto, decides to capture Nathan instead and hold him as their prisoner. Unbeknownst to Nathan, Katsumoto sees something in Nathan and believes that he is a good warrior who, although tries to kill the samurai, may be one of them due to his capacity to fight to the last breath. At first, Nathan is not treated kindly by the samurai, given that he is a former enemy and that he also killed the husband of Katsumoto's sister, who resents Ethan's presence in their village. Nathan also has his preconceptions and stereotypes regarding the samurai and their culture. Over time, though, Nathan starts to acclimate to his new life as a prisoner. He embraces the Japanese language and culture as well as earns the respect of the other samurai by learning swordsmanship as well as how to train with others. He also finds he has an affection for Katsumoto's sister and ends up befriending her son as well. While it is not easy, he gains an appreciation for the samurai and their way of life. He even begins to resent the modernity and the loss of the tradition that is being imposed on them by the Imperial Japanese government. In this way, The Last Samurai does an excellent job what it means to go native. When you live in another country for long enough, you start to really embrace certain aspects of the culture. And also, if you take a liking to the language, you may realize you may want to stay there now that you're acclimated rather than return to a home culture or country whose flaws become so visible to see when you were blind before to them. This movie does a great job of showing Stockholm Syndrome and how powerful it can be over time, especially if you have a romantic interest in a woman or a man after a long enough period of time. Algren is also no longer haunted by the nightmares of what he experienced during in the Indian Wars and has also forgone alcohol as he has found other ways to sustain himself while living with the samurai. Perhaps most importantly, he develops a friendship with the samurai's leader Katsumoto, who explains to Nathan their worldview and while preserving their 1000-year heritage is so important to them all. Nathan agrees with them and starts to see how important the ways of the samurai are to Japanese culture and customs themselves. The biggest turning point in the film is when Nathan begins to fight alongside the samurai against attacks by both ninjas, which one of the coolest scenes I have ever watched still. It is an amazing scene when you have samurai battling with ninjas, and it is a very powerful point in the movie to show Nathan helped save Katsumoto's life. The samurai are so dedicated to their way of life that they will die or commit seppuku, suicide, to preserve their honor without giving away the rest of the film. We can see that the Japanese emperor is being betrayed by big business interests and Western nations in the rapid attempt to modernize. While Japan was right in that it needed to catch up in areas of commerce and warfare, It is also important to remember the ways of the samurai and to remember their customs as well. It is not right to destroy an important part of their culture and erase it from the history books. That is what the samurai leader, Katsumoto, and also Nathan wanted to preserve, even if they knew that they were fighting a losing battle. A culture's customs must be remembered, and its history remembered by all, even if the country is to go in a new direction. The Last Samurai makes it clear that even if there are no more samurai, their memory must be retained in the national consciousness, and it is important for Japan to not be belittled or bullied around by other powers. Receiving Western advice, arms, and goods was a paramount need at that time, but not at the sake of destroying a part of Japan that made it a special nation to begin with. The Last Samurai is a powerful film because it reminds us all how customs and traditions form the backbone of a country's culture and its history. While nations shift and change, the traditions and customs should never be forgotten by its people. That is the main message of the film and why the samurai fought and died to preserve their place in Japanese society rather than be changed into something they are not. Becoming Western because they had to be was an insult to them and something they were against in an effort to remain as samurai in whatever capacity they could in order to serve the emperor. It is a powerful film and also shows the redemption of Nathan Algren, who went from a drunken soldier without purpose to a powerful samurai commander who was able to integrate himself as best as he could into a foreign culture and even earn the love of a woman whose husband's life he had ended. The Last Samurai has many themes to it, and each one of them are powerful. Remembering traditions, seeking vengeance, earning one's redemption are all themes to the film and make it stand out still today as one of the best films of the 2000s and maybe of this young century still. I hope you will check it out soon and please always remember the samurai.